Ghazi Gashut grew up as an international student who attended a large variety of international schools. Wait till you hear how many. He truly exemplifies what it is to be a TCK or third culture kid, which is someone who's not from the host country where they're going to school, but isn't really from their country of passport either, hence third culture. Another more recent term for this is cross-cultural kid. I was lucky enough to get to know Ghazi a little bit when he was a high school student at the International Community School of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Currently, he's an international educator working in Germany. And being a TCK or CCK allowed him to appreciate the nuances of being a global citizen. He believes that you're what your experiences make you, because they're what contribute to you being the person you are today. Ghazi shared the term multi-local as an aspect of being a cross-cultural student with many localities that they transitioned through while growing up. He spoke to his increased adaptability, learning to let go of the previous places while being open to what new places offer, as well as developing empathy and seeing multiple perspectives as some of the life skills that he developed through being a TCK/CCK. This episode was recorded on November 18th, 2022. He's a great guy. You're going to enjoy this. Let's meet Ghazi.
Hello, Ghazi, and welcome to the Educators Going Global podcast.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me on the show.
Great to have you here. So we always start with, where in the world are you?
So right now I'm in Germany teaching at the international school here.
So Ghazi, this is fun because I knew you as a student, but if you could share a little going global story from one of your experiences of living and now teaching overseas, that'd be great.
So I spent the majority of my young life up to the age of 18 bouncing around different countries. I think I hit 5 continents before I was 15 at that point. And
Wow.
yeah, it was very humbling. When I look back now, it was very humbling especially back then. This was, we're talking like, 35 years ago plus. So it wasn't even like a time when travel was as convenient as it is now. But yeah, just being able to be in those different locations and interact with so many different people. It's crazy. I mean, Russia, Australia, Africa, Europe. It's crazy.
I love it. So then how would you answer the question, where are you from? If someone asked you that question.
So that's not a simple question. There is obviously the simple, ethnic and sort of official passport and whatnot answer, but does that really represent who I am? That's a hard one to answer. Tai Selassie, she's a writer, she has a TED Talk where she coins this phrase called multi-local. And what she does here is she describes the different people who have a background that is not as straightforward as you may think. And even those who do have a straightforward background, who you are and where you're from kind of depends on where do you find that you are sort of most comfortable, or where in the world, it could be more than one place, where you find connections, where you've made connections. It could be somewhere you've lived before where you've built strong connections that you feel an affinity to that location. And it might not be a location where you are officially recognized to be from. It's kind of hard to answer that question. And to be honest with you, when I get asked that question, I don't give a straight answer because it's hard to say, well, I'm from here, but I'm from here and I've lived here, because it
Right.
doesn't do it justice, because I've lived in so many different places and I've got connections with so many different places that it's kind of a very difficult question to answer sometimes. Like I said, Tai Selassie does it justice. I mean, if you look up her TED Talk where she discusses this concept of multi-local, She calls it multi-local.
Right.
And it's just incredible the way she puts it together.
Awesome. Sounds like a great resource.
It is amazing. I actually teach it and I use it for my TOK classes.
Aha. Perfect.
So, Ghazi, one of the things we do with our guests is we bring them on as subject matter experts, and not putting the pressure on you here, but we are just beginning to peel back that onion of what it means to be a cross-cultural kid or a TCK. And right there, you're giving us a whole new concept to start thinking about this multi-local. So thanks for sharing that. And we'll definitely put the TED Talk in the show notes. So let's take a look at our huge, big guiding question of how did your growing up as a cross-cultural kid, a CCK, affect your personal development?
If I could summarize that into one word, adaptability.
Yeah.
Being able to adapt to pretty much any situation or environment quickly, easily would be not accurate, but quicker than most. Just being able to, pick up and leave and just move to a new place and be able to set up shop and move, and get on with your life without sort of too many, difficulties. I think that is a big one for me. And I've seen this where I've been traveling, around the world so long, and I've come across people who've not traveled as much. And again, this is just the way things are with the choices that you make. And I find that those who've not traveled as much find it more difficult to kind of let go of what they're used to, say in certain places when they move to a new location, because they may expect the same sort of services or same sort of expectations that they had in those other places. And what that ends up doing is it ends up detracting from appreciating where you currently are. And that in itself, you're not giving the place sort of, you're not doing it justice by not allowing it to, because when you move from one place to another, you're not taking that place with you as you move. You're moving to a whole new location, a new way of doing things, a new culture perhaps, and you need to appreciate that culture and that environment for what it has to offer, as opposed to, well, you know what, I'm moving from this location and I'm bringing everything that was over there with me over here, and I want to be the exact same. Well, if that's the case, then why would you move? Just stay there, because you can't bring your bubble, let's call it a bubble, you can't bring that bubble that you had in that location and move it, transplant it into this new location and expect it to be the exact same. It's not, it doesn't work. Some of my friends that I've come across who I see struggling with this, I try to say, look, you really need to kind of understand that it's not going to be the same as over there. So just accept this for what it is, appreciate it, admit that there are differences and that you are finding those differences maybe a little bit difficult to kind of navigate, but that's okay. It's all part of the process.
That's so cool because that really touches on an idea that we've been talking about, David and I, is the difference between an expatriate and a global nomad. Someone who's going to just kind of immerse themselves in this is what it is and let's enjoy it for what it is and not, think of myself as the other kind of thing. So
Exactly.
that's a really great answer.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I love it.
Let me add one more thing. And another theme here are transitions, which is such a big deal for families. And I work as a counselor trying to help families deal with the loss of things they're leaving behind. And then, as you're pointing out, being open and having that gratitude for new opportunities and open to new perspectives. So kind of one of my takeaways here is that the more that you grow your ability to be a cross-cultural kid, the more you become fluid in these transitions. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have some pain of loss and struggles, but the more that you do it, because I look at my two sons, they became so adaptable, as you say, that it just became easier and easier with each move. And they just kind of grew that strength of adaptability. So thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So, Ghazi, what took your family to Ethiopia, where I knew you there in the first place? And you've kind of already answered this, but tell us a little bit about the other international schools that you attended before and perhaps after that.
So again, my dad was an international civil servant, so he moved around a lot because of his job. And Ethiopia, or Addis Ababa was one of his postings. And my mother was a trailing spouse. So we followed him around the world as he moved to these different locations to do his job. In Before that, different environments, some were challenging, some were not so challenging. There were language barriers, there was cultural barriers, and obviously I was much younger at the time. I think by the time I got to Addis, I was a little bit more mature and a little bit more appreciative of where I was. Whereas when I was younger, I was probably a bit more, rebellious, or just like, why are we doing this? Why can't we just stay in the same place? I'm getting tired of this.
Right.
Whereas at that point, I realized, what, this is actually not so bad, because you get to reinvent yourself as you move from one school to another. And when you're young, you're like, oh, my friends are here, why am I doing this? And it becomes a bit of a challenge to make that transition. But as it comes into focus, you realize, what, actually, it's not so bad, because I didn't like how things were going there. Maybe I did. Maybe I can do this better. So it's a chance to reinvent, not your persona, but just how you would like to have been. It's just kind of a hard one to describe.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a great answer.
So you've hit on adaptability, reinventing, I'm sure flexibility. I'm hearing about having gratitude. So what are other ways that all this moving around, how did it affect you as an adult when you put together your personal profile now and think about your strengths? What are some other attributes that you gained from being a cross-cultural kid?
I think empathy. Empathy is a big one for me. I see people for who they are. I hope that I see people for who they are, and I treat them for how they treat me, as opposed to how, I think they should be treated. And I think moving around so much and being in international schools, where you've got such a wide mix of people of such differing backgrounds, has allowed me to appreciate that difference, as opposed to stereotype it or be condescending of that difference. It's more of a, oh, you're from here, that's so cool, as opposed to, oh, you're from here, And I find that certain people who haven't had that same exposure tend to favor the latter as opposed to the former. They like, oh, you're from there. And then you can sense the condescending tone and the lack of empathy of, hang on, wait a minute, why are you from there? It's just, like, what are you doing here? As opposed to, oh, you're from there, I bet you got some awesome stories you could tell me about that. And you know what, I heard about this, and hey, maybe we can, so my friends, I mean, something as simple as, I have friends who are in so many different locations. I mean, my best friends are like scattered across the globe, and they are of different ethnic backgrounds also. And I have no issues with that. I don't care. It doesn't phase me in the least that they are so different. I just love that fact that the variety is there, that the difference is there. It's just, it makes us who we are. And I like to think that I treat them based on how they treat me, as opposed to how they look, if that makes any sense.
Yes, and as teachers, one of the things that we're trying to help our students grow in is their ability to see complexities. So if I'm teaching history, I'm trying to help them understand that decisions and world events were often not just black and white, that there were so many different people involved, bringing different perspectives in, and it takes time to unpack that, and that's what real life is. And so you're describing that very clearly. I'm also getting the feeling that you really learn to question your assumptions. Intellectual humility, the character strength, that the more that you are just seeing how, back to that word, complex life can be, the more when you see yourself coming to a conclusion, I bet there's that inner voice kind of saying, let's question this and let me think harder about this, because this might not be as simple as I think it is. And that's one of the biggest life skills we want in all of our citizens, and as so many international schools say, our global citizens.
Yeah, true.
All right. So, adding on to the idea of multiple countries, it's interesting to me. You became so adaptable. You thought, why not keep it going? Why not become an international educator myself? So, please tell us a little bit about that journey.
So, international education. I kind of fell into that. I wasn't sure after I graduated university. I had a computer science degree, And I wasn't actually sure what direction I wanted to go. So I spent some time working on the side, programming stuff and just freelance stuff. But it didn't feel right. It just didn't feel like I'd found my calling. It wasn't my thing. And then a friend of mine was teaching in a school in the Middle East, in Dubai to be exact. And they had an opening for a computer science teacher. And teaching, I was like, I wasn't sure if that was my thing, but
Mhm.
I wasn't happy with what I was doing. I was like, you know what? I'm going to see how this kind of goes. And so I started, and I realized, within like the first 2 weeks, I was like, I think dealing with people and being in an environment, because where I was before that was very sort of monotone. Just I was, computers, programming, and then that was it. There was no interaction. There was no people. The variety wasn't there that I was used to, growing up. But when I was in the international school, I realized that, hang on, this is what was missing. I found what I can connect to again. I found the variety. I found the multiplicity of people and just that mix that I didn't have. And I was like, wait a minute, this is why it's not making any sense. And as soon as I realized that teaching was what I wanted to do, I went in and got my teaching degree and master's in education. I was like, you know what, this is what I want to. This is what I threw my whole weight into it. I was like, you know what, I'm going to pursue this. And of course, if I can, add on to that, obviously when I, without any teaching experience, it was difficult to kind of, put on those shoes. So I look back at my own sort of, experiences as a student, and I thought to myself, how and where can I fit this in? And so based on that, I looked at my own teachers and those that had the biggest influence on me, and I modeled them. And again, if
Right.
I, I don't know if I want to say this, but your husband, Audrey, was
Mhm.
literally the role model. Like
Wow.
he was the template that I used
Yeah,
to
that's awesome.
fashion my teaching style. Like pretty much everything that he did, I went back, broke it down, unpacked it, just try to figure it, and then just like, okay, how can I reinvent this and do the same? So things like, his warm-ups in the morning. I have my own daily
Uh-huh.
thing now that I do with him. Like I have a thought, a joke, a riddle, like all those things. And I've been doing those for like 25 years now or more. I can't
I
remember,
love
25,
it.
26.
That's
And
great.
it's just, and it's kind of funny because for the longest time we lost contact for a while when when you were, because this is all prior to the internet, prior to emails, prior to all those kind of,
Exactly.
so we lost contact for a number of years, but I kind of knew where you were roughly. And then we kind of made it happen. We found each other again. And then and up until recently I never got a chance to speak or to thank your husband for being who he was. And it was just he said something to me, time we were in contact, and I was like, I need to tell you now because this is not something that I can sit on any longer. And I don't know what it was, but just I just needed to share that because again, he was the reason I am who I am as a teacher today. And I tell my students, I had a
Mhm.
math teacher back in, when I was in high school, and he did this and he did that. I don't know how he got away with it, but I love doing it. I'd love to get away with myself, but it's just different things like that. I was like, I don't know how he did it, but he did it anyway. And it worked. And I was like, you know what? I tried it, but it didn't work, but I tried this instead. So it's just, again, I'm eternally grateful for the influence he had on me in that respect. And it's just that, coupled with the realization that I don't want to sit in an office and work behind a computer and not deal with people. And here's the other thing is, I think I prefer working with kids than working with adults because it's just that connection is there and I am able to sort of build on those connections. Whereas working in an office where I'm dealing with, computer programs and whatnot, just didn't seem to be something I wanted to pursue.
Wow, I love that. Thank you for the shout out. Mark will love that.
Yes, and Mark, he is such an outstanding individual in the classroom and on the playing field and just as a human being. So that's super that you're honoring him in that way. That's always an underlying hope, I think, for all of us educators that years later our students remember something about our time with them and maybe we had some influence on them. And Mark definitely is that type of educator. So one of the things that I think might have been happening for you is you moved around the world making all these different homes wherever you ended up, but you were building community. So I wonder subconsciously if your mind was telling you, I need to get back to community. Where can I find a community that nourished me as a young person growing up? So I wonder if that's part of it
I think you're right.
as well. Yeah, yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit and keep going with you as a teacher and looking out at your students. And I'm wondering what attributes you're seeing in your current cross-cultural students. What attributes, what character strengths do you see them growing because their feet are walking into different cultures? They're moving from country to country, or even just those that are pretty much staying there in Germany, but they're interacting with students from around the world.
Yeah, I think a lot of the same things. Although it's a lot easier now than it was years ago, because again, you have social media, you have the internet, you have these other means of staying in contact. So even if you decide, if you leave somewhere, you can still, video chat them, you can still message them on a daily basis. So they have that advantage to us when we were kind of doing this. Whereas for us to contact somebody, you had to send them a letter, and then you had to wait, like 3 or 4 weeks before you got a response,
Exactly.
to call them was kind of expensive because you couldn't afford to call everybody all the time. Whereas now, if you got an internet connection on a phone, you can contact anyone, and it's not going to cost you anything except maybe whoever's paying for the internet. So it's again that for them, I think, puts them at less makes it less stressful, the move. So, but now the other thing that I've noticed also is, even though they have that luxury, they have a hard time letting go. So I had a student a couple of years ago that was not happy with where she was, here in school, and she would spend a lot of time chatting with her friends back in her old school, and instead of trying to make new friends in this new environment, she was holding on to the old friends and the old environment and still trying to be a part of that community, even though she's no longer geographically in the same location, not even in the same time zone. So I saw that as being very challenging for them. Now, this is not an isolated case. I mean, there's other kids also who kind of had that same difficulty to different sort of extremes. But again, that even though is a blessing in itself to have the ability to stay in touch, not accepting that you are in a location that requires you to be fully engaged kind of undermines or may undermine your overall experience. Now, with that said, again, the qualities that I think I sort of was able to pick up along the way. I see them, in my students, the open-mindedness, the appreciation of different cultures, the empathy that comes with that. I see that in my students, and I try to, encourage it. I try to nurture it also. When we discuss different topics, like my morning sort of ritual, as I call it, is there's a thought-provoking question in there, and some of these thought-provoking questions sometimes take us on some interesting roads in terms of, okay, what do you think about this and why is this that. So it's not just computer science or TOK. We're bringing in these other ideas where I want them to learn life lessons also, at least trying to anyway.
I love that. So you really have mostly answered this one, comparing your experience as a student to those of your current students. Do you have anything else in general that you'd like to add as you're talking about your experience, either as a student, teacher, and now parent,
Now, yes, I'm a
uh,
parent also,
living in a different,
yes.
living and thriving in multiple locales?
What else? I mean, I don't know. I think I've pretty much. I think I've said it. Uh,
Okay,
yeah.
that's cool. So I can't resist asking you this question. Now that you're a father yourself, apparently you have a 6-year-old young man and a 3-year-old young man.
That's true.
What is your plan? Will you travel around, taking your kids with you so that they develop some of the wonderful qualities of TCKs that we talked about? Or will you stay in one place so that they don't have to go through the challenging life changes that you yourself faced as a kid? Had to ask.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, there are many facets to that question, and if it was just me, if it was just me, I would not even think twice about it. However, my spouse and I are from different backgrounds in that sense.
Ah,
So it's not something that I can decide on my own. It needs to be something that we have to, agree on. Because I grew up in many, many countries across the world, whereas my wife did not. And so because of that, we have a different view on how that should look. So it's not an easy question to answer that way.
right.
So my oldest has already, been to 3 different countries and lived in 3 different countries.
At the age of 6.
Oh, yeah, yeah, at the age of 6, yes. So he's already been exposed to, that kind of lifestyle. But again, it's one of those things where we need to kind of sit down and say, okay, how do we, what are you most comfortable with? If it was just up to me, yeah, it'd be pretty easy. But it's not up to me only. That's something that we have to discuss together.
Right. So if it was just up to you, you would have them move around?
Oh
I
yeah,
just want to make
yeah,
sure I
yeah.
clear on that. Okay, because you
Mhm.
do think it was good for you in the end. You,
It
in
was, yeah.
perspective of life, you realize
Yes,
that actually
yes,
it really
yes,
did
yeah,
make you, I guess, a better
yeah.
person in that sense. Okay.
I hope so.
Well, and yes, of course, marriage and raising kids is all about working together and,
Exactly,
figuring out finding that balance. So that's a
exactly,
very measured response and good for you. And
Thank you.
it's interesting to me that you've already moved around a couple of times despite your spouse not having had that background. Is that due to your jobs or hers?
My job.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Well, we'll see how it goes. We'll have to touch base with you again in another 6 years and see how your kids are developing. But
Absolutely.
at the very least, being in international schools will expose them to
Exactly. I
that
mean,
kind
they
of
have that as it is.
environment,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So they will meet kids from all over and so on. Even if they themselves don't travel around, they've got
absolutely.
their
So,
foot in
so that,
that
yeah,
TCK door a little bit. So, yeah,
absolutely. You're right. You're right. So that makes sense.
fantastic.
Ghazi, this has been so informative, especially for me as a counselor. And I think, like I was saying earlier, we're just scratching the surface of what it means to be a cross cultural kid, a TCK, a third culture kid. And I'm really hoping we can have you come back on at some point in the future to share more of your stories as someone growing up and also as an educator. And I think that's just wonderful how you've carried the lessons and the format of teaching from Mark Forgeron and made that a part of your craft. That's really special. So thank you for coming on the show, making time in your day. It's your teaching day, and I know you've got a break right now. So a heartfelt thanks to you for coming on the show.
Yeah, Ghazi, thank you so much. It's really been fun to reconnect with you, and I'm glad we've stayed in touch over the years and wish you all the best with your continuing career, your Rugrats, and life in general.
Thank you both for having me on the show. Seriously, it's been such. I really enjoyed being able to talk to you both about this, and you're doing something that I think is gonna make a difference. So thank you for doing what you do, and I can't wait to see how it all turns out at the end. So thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey.
And David.
Inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.